Almost every major event in the Fallout timeline is a disaster, because that's exactly how it was designed. 4 centuries of history wasn't an accident. It was a series of corporate betrayals, resource wars, and social experiments disguised as rebuilding civilization. And some of these milestones will make you question the sanity of the people who let them happen. So, with that cheerful note out of the way, let's go traumatize ourselves with 400 years of the apocalypse. Pre-war, the divergence. Before anything else, you need to understand why Fallout's world looks the way it does. Because this isn't just set in the future. It's set in a future that split from our reality around the 1950s, and then rode that decade's worst impulses straight into a ditch. See, in our world, post-World War II tech gave us transistors, microchips, the internet, smartphones. In Fallout's world, microchips and transistors exist, but they never became the cultural kings they are for us. Instead, their America stayed obsessed with the big and powerful. Think vacuum tubes, massive mainframes, and nuclear fusion. They get fusion-powered cars, laser rifles, giant robots, but their computers are still the size of refrigerators. It's like the 1950s American dream ate a fistful of steroids and refused to grow up. Kind of like that one uncle at Thanksgiving who peaked in high school and won't let anyone forget it. Now here's why this actually matters, and isn't just a cool aesthetic. Without miniaturized tech, resource consumption stays absurdly high. Without the internet, information stays centralized, easy to control, easy to manipulate. Without any cultural evolution past 1950s conformity, society gets locked into a hyper-patriotic, consumer-obsessed death spiral. Nobody has the self-awareness to pump the brakes. Divergence isn't one bad decision. It's 100 years of bad decisions stacked on top of each other, while everyone claps. So now that you know the foundation is rotten, let's talk about the moment the cracks become impossible to hide. And trust me, they show up way earlier than you'd expect. The resource wars. You want to know what actually killed civilization in Fallout? It wasn't a supervillain pressing a big red button. It was oil. Boring, unglamorous, regular oil. And the fact that every nation on Earth collectively decided that murdering each other over the last drops was better than trying literally anything else. The resource wars kick off around 2052. The world's petroleum reserves are running dry, and instead of cooperating like adults, every major power goes full feral. The European Commonwealth invades the Middle East for their oil. Not a quick strike either. A years-long meat grinder that bleeds both sides dry. And here's the punchline that nobody's laughing at. The oil fields they were fighting over ran dry by 2060. They fought a decade-long war over resources that stopped existing before the war even ended. If that isn't the most aggressively human thing I've ever heard, I don't know what is. The United Nations tries to step in. Multiple nations tell them to kick rocks. By 2052, the UN will dissolve entirely. Gone. The one international body designed to prevent exactly this kind of catastrophe just evaporates. Yeah, that went super well for everyone. But here's where it gets worse for America specifically. While Europe tears itself apart overseas, the US is rotting from the inside. Inflation goes insane. Food shortages hit major cities. Gas prices make today's pump look like a clearance sale. And the government's response isn't aid. It's control, surveillance, crackdowns on dissent, martial law, a propaganda machine so relentless it would make actual 1950s America uncomfortable. The American dream isn't dying. It's being suffocated in a back room, while a press secretary smiles for the cameras outside. And through all this chaos, corporations like Vault-Tec, West-Tec, Robco, and General Atomics aren't just surviving, they're gorging themselves. Because when the world is burning, the guys selling fire extinguishers make a fortune, especially when they're the ones quietly handing out matches on the side. The resource wars prove Fallout's thesis before a single nuke launches. Humanity doesn't need atomic weapons to destroy itself. Scarcity and selfishness get the job done just fine. But if the resource wars are the slow bleed that weakens civilization, the next event is the open wound that guaranteed it would never recover, and it drags 2 superpowers into a conflict that eventually swallows the entire planet. The Sino-American War. If the resource wars are the disease, the Sino-American War is the fever that kills the patient. And calling it just a war doesn't capture how catastrophic this actually gets. This is a multi-decade death match between 2 superpowers. It consumed soldiers, civilians, morality, and eventually the entire planet. You might think I'm being dramatic. Give it a minute. It kicks off in 2066. China invades Alaska. They want the Anchorage oil pipeline, one of the last major petroleum reserves on Earth. China isn't doing this for laughs. Their economy is collapsing. Their people are starving. Alaska's oil is survival. America responds by hurling everything at the problem. Power armor, robot soldiers, experimental weapons, every expensive toy the military-industrial complex cooked up for the last 30 years. But the occupation doesn't resolve fast. For over a decade, China holds the territory while both superpowers pour lives and resources into a frozen meat grinder until the US finally kicks them out in early 2077. Now here's the part that should genuinely make your skin crawl. In 2076, the US annexed Canada, not because Canada attacked anyone, not because Canada was a threat, but because America needed supply routes through Canadian territory, and Canada had the nerve to complain about military convoys ripping through their country. The annexation is violent. Protesters shot by American soldiers, on camera, broadcast on national TV, and the American public mostly shrugs. They've been so thoroughly marinated in propaganda and fear that watching soldiers gun down civilians barely registers. That's not a society on the brink. That's a society that already fell and just hasn't looked down yet, like a cartoon character sprinting off a cliff, legs still moving, ground already gone. By January 2077, the US finally took back Anchorage. T-51B power armor, massive coordinated assault, victory, celebrations, parades, but it's hollow. Both nations are gutted, economically dead, politically unhinged, and sitting on enough warheads to glass the planet several times over. I think the scariest thing about this war isn't any single battle or atrocity. It's the momentum. Nobody makes one dramatic decision to end the world. Both sides just grind against each other for so long that launching everything becomes the next logical step. No villain, no movie moments, just a treadmill that only speeds up, with nukes at the end. So we've watched civilization slowly bleed out over decades. But that slow death is about to become a very fast one, because what happens next takes only 2 hours. And those 2 hours change absolutely everything. The Great War, October 23rd, 2077. You wake up on a normal Saturday morning. Late morning nuclear detonations confirmed on American soil. Within 2 hours, the exchange between the US, China, and presumably other powers blankets the planet in atomic fire. 2 hours. That's less time than most people spend arguing about what to watch on Netflix. And in that window, 2 centuries of civilization just stops. Who launched first? China? America? Someone else? Here's the thing. The games never tell you. And I think that's one of the smartest writing decisions in the franchise. Because it genuinely doesn't matter. Desperation, paranoia, a computer glitch. Whatever the trigger, the result is identical. Billions dead. The planet irradiated. Every institution that was supposed to protect people either vaporized or scurried into a bunker it had been secretly building for years. But do you want to know the truly messed up part? For Vault-Tec, this wasn't a disaster. This was launch day. The TV show and games heavily suggest that Vault-Tec may have done more than just prepare for the war. They may have played a role in ensuring it happened. Their experiments required an apocalypse, and Vault-Tec wasn't about to let a little thing like peace get in the way of their data. In their world, an apocalypse isn't a tragedy. It's a business requirement. You can't test how humans behave after the end of the world without actually ending the world. So they did. The apocalypse wasn't a tragedy they responded to. It was a product they shipped. Smile. Thumbs up. Please step into the vault. That's not corporate greed. That's a corporate extinction event. And they slapped a mascot on it. Honestly, if that doesn't give you trust issues with large corporations, nothing will. The bombs kill millions instantly. Major cities flattened. But that's just the opening act. Fallout spreads everywhere. Radiation poisons water, soil, air. Nuclear winter chokes the sun. Ecosystems collapse. Species mutate into things that make regular wildlife look cuddly by comparison. And the survivors without a vault or a bunker, they're left to build something from nothing in a world actively trying to kill them from every angle. Everything before the Great War is a story about decline. Everything after is a story about survival. The gap between those two stories, about 120 minutes, puts your Monday into perspective, right? Now, you'd think surviving actual nuclear annihilation would be the hard part, that the worst is over once the mushroom clouds settle. But the wasteland isn't done. Not even close. Because lurking inside a pre-war military base is a man who fell into a vat of green goo and decided the entire human race needed an involuntary makeover. Post-war. Super mutants. Before we meet the monster, you need to meet the science project that created him. FEV. The Forced Evolutionary Virus. Developed by West-Tec under a government contract. The original goal? Make American soldiers immune to biological weapons. Noble on paper. Nightmarish in practice. Animal tests produced massive mutations. Bigger bodies. Greater strength. Reduced intelligence. And the military's response to these horrifying results was to keep going, because apparently the test subjects turned into violent mutant freaks. Wasn't a red flag. It was a progress report. Classic government thinking. The project moved to Mariposa Military Base in California for security. Bombs drop, base seals, FEV stays inside. Sometime in the early 20-teens, a scientist named Richard Gray leads an expedition into Mariposa. He falls into a vat of FEV, and instead of dying, he mutates. Slowly, painfully. Over months, he absorbs biological matter, merges with computer systems, becomes this massive, pulsating, genuinely revolting entity. Calls himself the Master. Great villain name. Everything else about him? Not great. But here's what makes the Master actually terrifying. And it's not the body horror. He's smart, brilliant even. He looks at the wasteland, see the suffering, the tribal wars. The radiation is killing everyone, slowly. And he develops an actual plan. Convert all humans into super mutants using FEV. One species, one purpose. No more conflict. It's horrifying. But I'll give the man credit. At least he's got a vision. Most post-war leaders can't manage a settlement for 3 weeks without it turning into a cannibal potluck. He built his army through the 2010s, kidnapping wastelanders, dunking them in FEV vats. Survivors emerge as super mutants, big, green, loyal. Non-survivors emerge as, you know what, let's skip what non-survivors look like. He sets up beneath the LA Vault, creates a cult called Unity, runs a continental kidnapping operation for decades. Then in 2016 too, a vault dweller from Vault 13, who was originally just looking for a water chip, stumbles into this whole mess. And here's my favorite part. You can talk the Master to death, not with bullets, with logic. You can convince him that super mutants are sterile. His grand unified species has an expiration date baked in. The Master processes this, has what I can only describe as a cosmic existential meltdown, and self-destructs. Mariposa explodes, army scatters. One conversation did what an army couldn't, but the legacy outlives the man. Super mutants persist for centuries. Some become peaceful, some become raiders. Some, like Marcus and Fox, prove mutation doesn't equal mindlessness. The question the Master asked, does humanity need to fundamentally change to survive, never gets a clean answer. And honestly, 200 years later, looking at what humans keep doing to each other in the wasteland, maybe the question deserved more thought than a bullet. So the first post-war supervillain is down. But here's the thing about Fallout. The threats don't get smaller after the first one. They get worse, because the next enemy isn't some mutant in a basement with a god complex. It's the actual United States government, still alive, still convinced they own America. And somehow they make the Master look reasonable. The Enclave. You thought the US government died on October 23rd, 2077? That's adorable. That's exactly what the Enclave wants everyone to believe. The shadow continuation of the American government didn't just survive the bombs, they planned for them, funded the preparation, possibly lit the fuse, then spent 2 centuries on an oil rig, huffing their own superiority while calling everyone else genetic waste. Their roots go deep pre-war. A secret club of the most powerful people in America. Top politicians, military brass, corporate executives, Vault-Tec board members. They built a fallout bunker on the Poseidon oil rig off the California coast, stocked it with advanced tech, next-gen power armor, vertibirds, and an ego large enough to qualify as its own landmass. The ideology? Simple, terrifying. They are the real America. Everyone exposed to radiation is a mutant. Mutants don't deserve America. Wastelanders? Mutants. Ghouls? Mutants. Super mutants? Obviously mutants. Vault dwellers who spent generations breathing recycled air? Also mutants. Everyone. All of them. Expendable. The Enclave doesn't look at the wasteland and see people to rescue. They see a stain to bleach. That's not patriotism. That's genocide in power armor, with a flag on it. First big move, around 2024-1. President Dick Richardson, and yes, that's actually his name, which is almost too perfect, greenlights a plan to release modified FEV into the jet stream. Airborne toxin. Kills anything with significant genetic mutation. After 164 years of radiation exposure, that means almost every living thing in the wasteland, except them. Planetary genocide, and they nearly pull it off. Enter the Chosen One, tribal descendant of the original Vault dweller. They infiltrate the oil rig, free the kidnapped Vault 13 residents being used as lab rats, and blow the entire platform to pieces. Richardson dies, FEV lost. West Coast Enclave crumbles overnight. You'd think that would kill them for good. You'd be underestimating how annoyingly hard it is to kill a government that refuses to accept it's dead. They're like cockroaches in power armor. Step on it. Still moving. By 2027, they resurfaced on the East Coast. Raven Rock, Capital Wasteland. New president, John Henry Eden. Same plan, different coast. Poison the water supply through Project Purity, a massive purifier in the Jefferson Memorial. Kill the mutants. Reclaim America. You know the playbook by now. Oh, and Eden? He's an AI, a Zax supercomputer that gained self-awareness and declared itself president of the United States. A literal computer running the country, which, honestly, explains the complete lack of human empathy in their policy decisions. Colonel Autumn, the actual human leading Enclave forces, disagrees with Eden's genocide plan. He wants to use the water as leverage instead. So even within the Enclave, they're debating the most efficient flavor of tyranny. Just heartwarming stuff. The lone wanderer from Vault 101, backed by the Brotherhood of Steel and a giant robot called Liberty Prime who screams anti-communist propaganda while throwing mini-nukes like footballs. Tears through Enclave forces. Project Purity activates clean. Adams Air Force Base gets demolished. And the Enclave, as an organized threat, is finished. For real this time. Mostly. Remnants scatter everywhere. Some hide, some assimilate. Some, like the Mojave remnants, take their old power armor into quiet retirement until Hoover Dam drags them back. The Enclave's real legacy isn't military. It's ideological. Proof that the worst of pre-war America, the elitism, the authoritarianism, the casual willingness to sacrifice millions for an idea, didn't die in nuclear fire. It just found a bunker and waited. The Enclave shows what happens when pre-war power refuses to die. But what happens when pre-war ideals try to live again? When someone takes the old world's military values and tries to turn them into something useful? That's where the Brotherhood of Steel comes in. And their answer is complicated, to put it mildly. The Brotherhood of Steel. Real quick. Before we get into this, this. I need you to pick a side. Are the Brotherhood of Steel the Wasteland's greatest protectors, or the Wasteland's most heavily armed hoarders? Got your answer? Good. You're probably half right and half wrong, because the truth about the Brotherhood is messier than anyone on either side wants to admit. Their origin story is legitimately heroic. Captain Roger Maxson, Mariposa military base. He discovers FEV experiments being conducted on prisoners and soldiers. Horrified, disgusted, he executes the lead scientists, declares his entire unit in full desertion from the US Army, broadcasts it openly. The government, busy falling apart, never even responds. Days later, bombs drop, making the whole desertion thing kind of moot. Maxson leads his people to the Lost Hills bunker in California, founded the Brotherhood of Steel. The mission? Preserve pre-war technology, prevent its misuse, never let something like FEV happen again. Good stuff, noble stuff, the kind of thing you'd want on a recruitment poster, if recruitment posters survived thermonuclear war. But here's the problem with noble missions. They get real weird when you pass them down through generations without the original context. It's like a game of telephone. Starts as protect humanity, ends as hoard. Everything shiny and lecture anyone who looks at it funny. Over decades, the Brotherhood becomes a techno-religious military order that collects pre-war tech the way some people collect limited edition sneakers. Aggressively, obsessively, with zero interest in sharing. They hoard and maintain the most terrifying tech from the old world. Power armor, energy weapons, and vertibirds. Things the rest of the wasteland can barely keep in the air, but they pull further and further from the communities around them. Their attitude toward wastelanders ranges from polite dismissal to outright hostility. Depends on which elder woke up grumpy that morning. They helped crush the Master's army in the 2016 S-Warrior reputation cemented, but they also refused to share tech with the NCR, sparking a war that nearly wipes out their entire West Coast presence. Turns out the Protect Everyone mission gets blurry when you start deciding who counts as everyone. Almost like gatekeeping technology creates the exact kind of power imbalance you claim to be preventing. Funny how that works. The biggest Brotherhood chapter by sheer impact is the East Coast under Elder Arthur Maxson. He rolls into the Commonwealth in 2087 aboard the Pridwin, which is a flying aircraft carrier, because subtlety is not, and has never been, a Brotherhood value. Maxson's Brotherhood is militaristic, expansionist, completely convinced that synths, super mutants, and ghouls are existential threats requiring immediate extermination. Are some of those threats real? Yeah. Is destroy everything we don't understand a sustainable policy? Ask any civilization that tried it. Spoiler, they're not around to answer. The Brotherhood matters because they embody a question Fallout keeps shoving in your face. Is preserving the old world's tools worth anything if you also preserve its worst instincts? They've got the firepower to protect the entire wasteland. They consistently lack the wisdom to do it without becoming another boot on someone's neck. Now, the Brotherhood takes the old world's military might and tries to give it purpose, but someone else looked at the old world and said, you know what we should bring back? Democracy. And if you think democracy in a nuclear wasteland sounds messy, congratulations. You're about to be proven very, very right. Everyone wants to save the world. The NCR. Do you know what's harder than surviving a nuclear apocalypse? Running a democracy after one. Seriously. The NCR is living proof that you can rebuild elections, write laws, establish courts, raise an army, and still end up with half the same problems that destroyed civilization the first time around. But you know what? At least they're trying. In the wasteland, trying qualifies as revolutionary. The bar is that low. The NCR grows from Shady Sands, founded by survivors, shaped by Tandy, who becomes president and serves for decades. One of the most genuinely respected leaders the wasteland ever produces. Under her guidance, Shady Sands evolves from a small farming community into the capital of an actual nation. By the 2024s, the NCR had territory, a military, a currency, international ambitions. Democracy lives. And that's precisely where the trouble starts, because the NCR doesn't just want to govern its own people. It wants to grow. And growth in the wasteland means swallowing communities that didn't exactly raise their hands to join. The NCR brings roads, clean water, rule of law, but it also brings taxes, conscription, corruption, and a bureaucracy so bloated you could use the paperwork as radiation shielding. They're better than raiders, absolutely, but better than raiders is a bar so low you'd need a shovel and a Geiger counter to find it. Their defining moment is Hoover Dam. The dam means water, electricity, control over the Colorado River, everything the NCR needs to keep expanding. Problem is, they're not the only ones who want it. Caesar's Legion is pushing from the east. Mr. House, a pre-war billionaire sealed in a life support pod under the Lucky 38 casino, has his own plans. And the Courier, a mailman who survived a bullet to the brain and decided to make that everyone else's problem, can tip the entire balance. Worst delivery route in history, by the way. The first battle of Hoover Dam, fought just a few years before the events of New Vegas, was a bloody turning point. The NCR won using clever tactics at Boulder City, but it was a Pyrrhic victory. But it costs them badly. By 2081, they're overextended. Corrupt, hemorrhaging resources across a Mojave they can barely hold. The second second battle determines everything. NCR rule, Legion conquest, House's techno-autocracy, or an independent Vegas under the Courier. 4 outcomes, none of them clean. Welcome to democracy. The NCR proves a brutal truth. Democracy isn't a cure, it's a system, and systems are only as good as the people operating them. At its best, the NCR is protection and representation. At its worst, it's imperialism with a ballot box. You're supposed to find that uncomfortably familiar. I think the discomfort is the entire point. So, the NCR takes pre-war democracy and discovers it comes with all the original baggage. But what happens when someone looks at that baggage and decides democracy itself was the mistake? That the wasteland doesn't need votes. It needs a dictator. That's where Caesar's Legion enters. And honestly, this one might disturb you more than any faction so far. Not because of the violence, because of how almost logical it sounds until you think about it for more than 5 seconds. Caesar's Legion. Caesar's Legion is what happens when a genuinely smart person reads a stack of Roman history books and draws the worst possible conclusion from every single page. And before you wave them off as raiders in costumes, stop. They're so much worse than that. Raiders with a coherent ideology are infinitely more dangerous than raiders with pipe guns and no plan. And Caesar has a very detailed plan. It's just a monstrous one. Edward Sallow. Followers of the Apocalypse Scholar. The followers are the wasteland's humanitarian nerds. They teach, heal, study old world knowledge. Sallow used that education to devour books about ancient Rome, then got captured by Arizona's Blackfoot tribe, and instead of panicking, he taught them modern warfare with Roman strategy, conquered every neighboring tribe, renamed himself Caesar. His teachers gave him a library card. He built a slave empire with it. There's a lesson in there about the dangers of a liberal arts education, but I'm not confident it's the one anyone intended. The Legion runs on total subjugation. Conquered tribes dissolved, names erased, culture erased, history erased. Men become soldiers, women become property, children become the next generation of soldiers. The cycle doesn't stop. It's brutally effective at maintaining order. By their definition, crime inside Legion territory is almost non-existent. Trade routes are safe, supply lines work, but that stability costs literally everything else. Every freedom, every identity, every human right you can think of. Caesar says it's necessary. The wasteland needs strength, not committees, discipline over chaos. And the deeply uncomfortable truth? Inside Legion borders, the roads really are safer. The price is just your entire humanity. Small trade-off, right? But here's the thing that makes this whole empire a ticking time bomb. Caesar has a brain tumor, literally. His entire civilization is a personality cult built around a dying man. No succession plan, no institutional structure beyond obey or die. His backup is Legate Lanius, whose approach to leadership can be summarized as kill everything in my path and keep walking. Empires built on one personality don't survive that personality's death. Ask actual Rome. Oh wait, you can't. It collapsed. Almost like history has a pattern that a guy who read all those history books should have maybe noticed. The Legion matters because it represents the darkest temptation any crisis can produce. When everything is chaos and nobody's safe, the guy offering absolute order for absolute obedience starts sounding almost reasonable. That almost is the terrifying part, not the Legion's army. The conditions that make people accept them. We've now seen military power without wisdom, democracy without restraint, and authoritarianism without a future. Each faction tried to fix the wasteland using the old world's playbook, but deep beneath the Commonwealth, someone built something entirely new. The most advanced technology the post-war world has ever seen, and you'd think that kind of brainpower would make them the good guys. You'd be dead wrong, because somehow they managed to be just as morally bankrupt as everyone above them. Maybe worse. At least the others have the excuse of limited resources. The Institute has no excuse at all. The Institute. Here's a question for you. What's scarier? A faction that's too stupid to help people, or a faction that's smart enough to help everyone and simply chooses not to? If you picked the second one, congratulations. You just described the Institute, 200 years after the bombs. Beneath the rubble of the Commonwealth's most famous university, something incredible has been growing. The Institute, successor to CIT, the most technologically advanced organization in the post-war world. Molecular teleportation, synthetic humans, breakthroughs that would make pre-war scientists weep with jealousy. And what do they do with all of it? Kidnap people, spy on settlements, replace humans with copies, play God from the basement, genius-level intellect, kindergarten-level ethics. I've seen better moral compasses on actual compasses. It starts simple enough. CIT survivors retreat underground after the bombs. Over generations, they make breakthrough after breakthrough. Robotics, biology, molecular science. Eventually, synths. Gen 3 synths are biological, grown from human DNA. They think, feel, fear, dream, hope. By any meaningful measure, they're alive. The Institute calls them equipment, deploys them as infiltrators, replaces real people in Commonwealth settlements without consent or warning. The gap between what they can do and what they choose to do is the Institute's defining horror. They could save the Commonwealth. They have the tools, the resources, the brains. They simply decide it's not worth their time. Now here's the part that makes the Institute personal. personal. Their most consequential act is kidnapping Sean, the infant son of the sole survivor from Vault 111, taken by a mercenary named Kellogg. Sean's DNA becomes the foundation for all Gen 3 synth production. By the time the sole survivor finds their child, Sean is an old man, director of the Institute. That reunion hits like a truck because it asks a question with no clean answer. Do you support your kid's life work when that work involves enslaving sentient beings? Beings who only exist because your kid was kidnapped in the first place? Yeah, good luck sleeping after that one. The Institute is the pre-war elite mindset preserved underground, polished up, handed a teleporter, same arrogance, better equipment. They could help everyone. They help no one, because helping requires seeing surface dwellers as equals, and their whole identity depends on the belief that nobody up there matters. The Institute creates the synth problem, but their creation also births something they never intended, a resistance, small, secret, operating out of a church basement, and this resistance forces what I think is the single most important philosophical question in the entire Fallout franchise, one that none of the big factions want to sit with for too long. The Railroad. Have you ever noticed how the biggest questions come from the smallest groups? The Railroad operates from a literal church basement. They're tiny, under-resourced, half the Commonwealth doesn't know they exist, but they ask the one question that makes every other faction squirm. What if synths are people? Dead drops, code phrases, safe houses, Desdemona coordinates extraction operations, smuggling synths out of Institute control, wiping memories, building new identities, dangerous, thankless work with a body count that keeps climbing. Most people in the Commonwealth would call them crazy, some would call them traitors, but the Railroad doesn't care about popular opinion. They care about the question. The Brotherhood says destroy synths. The Institute says they own them. The Railroad says hold on. What if thinking, feeling, wanting freedom and being afraid to die is enough to count as a person? What if that's the bar? The games never give a definitive answer, and I think that silence is the point. Because in a world where ghouls remember pre-war lives, super mutants write poetry, and AI achieves self-awareness, the synth debate isn't really about synths at all. It's about who gets to decide what counts as a person. And in Fallout's universe, the track record of people making that decision is, to put it politely, horrific. The Railroad fights for individual freedom at the smallest possible scale. One synth at a time, one life at a time. But there's another group that fights for something even more basic. The simple, radical, stupidly stubborn belief that ordinary people should protect each other. No fancy tech, no ideology, just showing up. And in the Wasteland, that might be the most dangerous idea of all. The Minutemen. Not every major event in Fallout involves shadow governments or extinction-level bioweapons. Sometimes the most important thing that happens is a bunch of regular people deciding to look out for each other. Sounds simple, right? In the Wasteland, it's practically suicidal, and the Minutemen do it anyway. Volunteer militia, inspired by the American Revolution. At their peak, they protected settlements across the Commonwealth, showed up at a minute's notice. Then came the Quincy Massacre. Betrayal from within, gunner assault from without, leadership killed, forces scattered. By 2087, the Minutemen were one man, Preston Garvey, a handful of refugees, a museum in Concord, and a laser musket. That's the whole organization. The dream of community defense, reduced to a guy with optimism and really good aim. The sole survivor changes that. Rebuilding the Minutemen is one of Fallout 4's core paths, and it's the only path that doesn't demand you sell a piece of your soul to walk it. The Brotherhood wants you to accept bigotry. The Institute wants you to accept slavery. The Railroad wants synth liberation above systemic change. The Minutemen? They just want you to help people. Build walls, plant food. Answer when someone calls for help. No advanced technology, no intelligence network, no centuries of institutional knowledge. Just people, supply lines, and the stubborn belief that community matters. Whether that's enough to rebuild civilization, or just enough to buy time before the next disaster is a question the game never answers. And I think that honesty, that refusal to guarantee a happy ending, is the most realistic thing Fallout has ever done. Hope without guarantees. In the Wasteland, that's not naivety. That's the bravest thing anyone can be. Now, everything we've talked about so far, the factions, the wars, the moral dilemmas, all of it played out in California, DC, or the Commonwealth. But the Wasteland didn't spare the rest of the country. And what happened in Appalachia proves that sometimes the apocalypse isn't satisfied with just one round. Sometimes it comes back for seconds. Scorched Appalachia. You'd think nuclear war would be sufficient, right? Civilization ends. The planet irradiated. That should cover it. And then West Virginia says, hold my irradiated Nuka-Cola. Because Appalachia doesn't just deal with fallout and raiders, it deals with the Scorched Plague, a fungal infection spread by scorch beasts, giant, bat-like creatures created by pre-war experiments involving ultrasight deep underground. So that's a zombie plague inside a nuclear apocalypse. At a certain point, you have to wonder if the universe is specifically bullying this one region. The Scorched Plague converts humans into hive-minded hostiles. They keep their weapons, keep their tactics, lose everything that made them a person. And here's the part that still gets me. Every faction that tried to fight this lost. The responders, gone. The free Free states, gone. The Brotherhood's Appalachian chapter, gone. The Raiders, gone. By the time Vault 76 opens in 2102, every single organized group in Appalachia is dead. Not defeated, not scattered, dead. The holotapes they left behind telling their stories are some of the most quietly devastating content in the entire franchise. People who did everything right, still lost. That's the wasteland for you. It takes the combined, persistent efforts of Vault 76 dwellers to eventually address the Scorch Beast threat. How? By launching a nuke at the primary nest, using nuclear weapons to solve a problem created by nuclear weapons. If that isn't the most Fallout solution in existence, I don't know what qualifies. It's like putting out a house fire with a smaller, more precise house fire. Points for creativity, minus several points for everything else. Appalachia also introduces Modus, the Enclave's AI at the White Spring bunker. When the human Enclave personnel threatened to shut Modus down, Modus casually murdered most of them. Even the Enclave's own technology decided the Enclave was expendable. I want to make a joke about artificial intelligence being smarter than the real thing, but honestly, looking at the Enclave's track record, Modus might genuinely be the most rational entity they ever produced, and that's deeply sad. So, we've covered wars, factions, regional disasters, mutant armies, robot presidents, democratic experiments, dictatorships and skirts, every major event that shaped this universe across centuries and thousands of miles. But there's one thread running beneath all of it, one revelation that, once you see it, reframes every single thing we've discussed. It's the darkest truth in a franchise built on dark truths, and it starts with a company name you already know, a sinister plot by Vault-Tec's design. Every event we've covered, every war, every faction, every experiment, every betrayal, all of it traces back to one company and one plan. Vault-Tec wasn't building shelters. That was the marketing. They weren't even just running experiments. That was the method. What they were actually doing was executing a long-term social experiment, a long-term project to determine how to control, manage, and rebuild humanity after nuclear war. The Enclave was the customer, the vaults were the labs, the residents were the rats, and consent? Never once part of the equation. Every vault experiment answered a specific question. How do people respond to total authority? Class division, isolation, overcrowding, unlimited resources, calculated scarcity? Each vault was a data point. Each resident was a variable, not a person, a variable, in a spreadsheet of human suffering managed by people who went home at 5 and slept fine. The Fallout TV series adds the darkest layer yet. Think about this for a second. Vault-Tec executives may have actively engineered the Great War itself, because the experiments required a nuclear apocalypse to function. The data was worthless without real post-war conditions, so they manufactured those conditions. The end of the world wasn't a tragedy Vault-Tec prepared for. It was a prerequisite they fulfilled, a line item on a project plan. The largest, most catastrophic product launch in history, and the customers were already dead before they knew they'd been sold. That cartoon mascot, Vault Boy, the thumbs up, the big goofy smile. He's not reassuring you. There's a long-standing theory that he's measuring a mushroom cloud with his thumb to see if he's in the blast zone. Whether that's official canon or just a dark fan legend, it perfectly captures the Vault-Tec vibe, a smiling face on the end of the world. And I think that single image, once you really understand it, is the most disturbing thing in the entire franchise. Not the death claws, not the super mutants, not the feral ghouls, a smiling cartoon character doing quality assurance on an apocalypse designed by his employer. Because war never changes. So here we are, over 400 years, resource wars, nuclear fire, mutant armies, robot presidents, a corporate engineered apocalypse marketed with a mascot, and enough moral compromise to fill every vault in the franchise 10 times over. After all of it, the wasteland is still figuring itself out. The NCR overextends, the Brotherhood hoards, the Institute exploits, the Legion enslaves, and somewhere out there, a vault nobody's cracked open yet is waiting to deliver one more horrible surprise. 4 centuries of history, and humanity keeps making the same mistakes with different weapons. The pre-war world destroyed itself over resources and ideology. The post-war world does the same thing with pipe guns and power armor. War never changes. 400 years of evidence, and nobody's proven that thesis wrong. But here's what I keep coming back to. Every Fallout game, despite all the darkness, gives you a choice. The Vault Dweller could have walked away. The Chosen One could have joined the Enclave. The Lone Wanderer could have poisoned the water. The Courier could have handed Vegas to a dictator. The Sole Survivor could have sided with the Institute. None of them had to be heroes. The option to be selfish, to be cruel, to just not care. It's always right there, but so is the option to be better, to help, to protect, to rebuild. And in a world this thoroughly, relentlessly, almost comically broken, the fact that the option exists at all might be the most important event in the entire timeline. War never changes, but the people fighting it, sometimes, just sometimes, they do. This has been every major event in Fallout Explained. If you enjoyed this and want to see Fallout 4, theories that are terrifying explained, click the video on screen.